Thank you for joining the September 2024 VMware TAM customer webinar. This webinar is organized by the VMware TAM organization to provide our customers the opportunity to interact with great speakers about content that will help them get the full benefit from their VMware software. Before we get into today's content, there are just a couple of announcements. Our next TAM customer webinar will be on October 10th, and we will have the privilege of being joined by Kyle Gleed to talk about VCF deployment topologies. Your interaction during this webinar is important, so please make use of the Q&A feature of Zoom to ask your questions. If we are unable to answer your question during this webinar, please be sure to reach out to your TAM and ask them to follow up. At the end of today's session, you will be prompted to fill out a short survey related to the value you received from this session and any topic suggestions for the future. Your completion of the survey helps drive future topics, and we appreciate your participation. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded, and your TAM can make the recording link available to you. After a few months, the recording will be publicly available on the VMware TAM Services YouTube channel. Sonny, Kelcey, Dave, and Sejong and Sashin will be presenting today. We'll have a few folks actually doing demos and going through slides, and then a few other folks that'll be handling some of the Q&A. And so the topic today is what's new in ARIA Operations 8.18. Dave, please go ahead.
Great, thanks everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Pretty big topic, pretty big major release for ARIA Operations. A couple of bits of news here and there before we get started. So everyone knows it as ARIA Operations. It's actually going to, I don't want to call it change, but it's going to slowly morph into VCF Operations. So you may hear us starting to talk about it as VCF Operations. Same thing, just easier naming nomenclature, I think, going forward, because that is really what it's going to be working on, is being focused on that VCF environment and how you can do all of your operations in one place. And speaking of which, here are the different pieces and parts that we delivered with VCF 5.2. We love putting things into buckets, makes it easier for us to talk about it. And the first one is that unified cloud operations story. Being able to say, look, what do you need to do from a cloud admin standpoint to be able to monitor, troubleshoot, administer, manage, etc., the entire VCF cloud? Can we do that all in one place? And you'll see with this release, that's the direction we're starting to go. We're starting to say, hey, instead of having to hop around between 4 or 5 different UIs in VCF, what if we could put everything into one place and start organizing it that way? Now, we haven't gotten to the end result of that quite yet, but we're certainly making strides in that direction. You'll see that as the guys go through some of the pieces of the demo, that some of the left-hand navigation, some of the screens, some of the things we're bubbling up into the new summary pages, etc., are going to start reflecting that goal of this unified cloud operation. So I've already talked about the new console experience. We did make some enhancements to capacity and cost management. We are now part of the single sign-on story for VCF, which is great. We did do some major improvements to scale and performance. In some cases, we were almost able to double the scalability of VCF operations. There's KB articles out there on that already. We've done some enhancements to the usability and visualizations, making it easier to utilize the UI as a whole and where to find things. We've added support for things like vSAN Max, TKC, supervisor clusters. We've even updated some of the management packs that deal with databases, networks, etc. So that's all part of that unified cloud operations story. The next one is simplified diagnostics, right? So as you may have heard, we are starting to embed a lot of the value that was in Skyline into VCF operations. Being able to give you that end-to-end story of how do I do diagnostics of the entire cloud? Is everything running the levels they should be? Do I have configurations that are going to be causing me vulnerabilities? Are there patches that I need to be grabbing? Are there settings I need to be set? If you're a fan of Skyline, as many of us are, this is a great opportunity to start using it in one place. If you're not a fan, or not a user of Skyline yet, this is a great opportunity to get used to it and start seeing the value of it. Then there's the improvements to the cloud itself, right? Security, compliance, etc. And a lot of these, I think, are, you know, when I was at Explore recently, I had an opportunity to talk to quite a few customers, and I kept explaining to them that, you know, we looked at a lot of the things that make your day-to-day toiling kind of troublesome and long and whatever. We have a lab that we run, and some of these items are ones that really drive us nuts in our lab. So like certs. I hate certs. It's the most painful thing. And of course, you know, we have so many of them. And, you know, in my lab, when a cert breaks, it takes down 3 or 4 things and people are complaining. And then we run around trying to find out, how do we update the cert? What type of cert is it? Is it self-signed, etc.? So we've taken the ability to bring in all those different certs and provide some cert management and visibility. Same thing with licenses, right? Licenses, there's all different types of licenses. What license level am I at? How much usage do I have? Am I running out? Am I not using everything I can? Again, a great new feature is just license management across the entire cloud. We've also introduced config drift to be able to show you what your current configuration status is and how it maps to your gold configuration posture or template. And then some audit events. This is a great one. I love this. This demo is going to be great. Kelcey's going to be showing that at the end. And we already have the ability with VCF operations for logs to be able to pull all that data together. If somebody said, hey, what's going on in this environment? Can you give me an audit trail of what's going on? What's changed? Are there any bad actors? You can go into logs and start looking for it. What we've done is we've given you one window now to go and find all of that in one place, and a really simplified UI to use it. And then we updated some of the compliance packs for CSA, for instance, and a couple other updates as well. So pretty big release, really, for VCF operations. The items in green are the ones we're going to cover today, because these are the big ones to me. And it's a very demo-heavy day today, so hopefully you guys enjoy it. We'll be here to do Q&A. We're going to try our best to answer the questions specifically on the topics here at hand. And I think I've taken up enough of the time. I think you probably need to get started, or I'll keep going, Sonny.
All right, sounds good. Sounds good. Hi, all. My name is Sonny Nguyen. I will be talking about diagnostics and certs. I will then hand this over to Kelcey, who will do centralized licensing, config drift, and audit events. Along the way, as we're talking, as we're demoing, please don't hesitate to ask questions related to the topics. We've got Sejong and we've got Sachin online answering everything for you. Honestly, they are pretty good and they could probably answer a lot. All right. So with that, let's move forward. So let's talk about diagnostic. All right. So I'm just going to show just a few slides. I'm actually going to show the demo more than the slides, but I just want to level set everybody. Right. So let's be honest. If you never use ops, right, you never knew that there were a lot of functionality in there that provides diagnostic information. If you've used ops, you know, go into the dashboard, you look around and you will find stuff. With that being said, it doesn't have everything, right? So if you talk to your TAMs and your TAM says, oh, by the way, you know, once in a while, once a year, once whatever interval it may be, we can run a health analyzer to your environment and give you guidance on what's going on, right? So once again, another product. You've heard Dave mentioning about, you know, Skyline Advisor. You go, you connect it in, and then it provides you insight on what's going on. Likewise, if you've ever used Skyline Health Diagnostic, it's an OVA that you deploy. You then put logs into it, and then you can view the logs to see what's going on. But at the same time, it also provides you diagnostics as well. So what you're hearing from me is that, you know, VMware as a whole, we have a lot of diagnostic feature-rich, you know, appliances or applications. With that being said, it's fairly complex, right? Because if you have deployed health diagnostic, advisor, health analyzer, ops, that's a lot of pieces that you need to deploy, maintain, and work with, right? And not everything has all of the pieces, all of the data in one place. Yes, we do have some integration, but for example, ops will have integration into logs, which will also have integration into a, Skyline via management pack. But not all the feature, not all the capabilities are there. Likewise, as I said earlier, that's a lot of environments. That's a lot of things that you need to maintain. And sometimes it's so daunting that folks don't deploy everything I mentioned. Therefore, you lose out on stuff, right? And the goal for VCF Diagnostic is all right, let's take a look at your whole environment and let's identify, hey, what are the common problems that we see across the board from every industry? If it shows up in your environment, hey, you should really look at this, right? Likewise, because ops is tied to ops and logs, it also says, oh, by the way, we're looking at your environment, we're seeing the trends, we're seeing everything, but we're also seeing within logs, there's some unknown issues that you didn't notice. Maybe you should look into this because it's starting to ramp up and it's a concern for you. And then last but not least, the earlier conversation about, Skyline and health diagnostic and stuff like that is you're running these particular versions, right? Ops knows that you're running these versions. Hey, here are some of the common problems that customers have pertaining to this problem, pertaining to this integration with this stack, with this configuration. And the whole goal of diagnostic is to bubble up some of the old features that were already inherent in ops, but also some of the new features that we're going to show you really soon to say, here's everything. Now it's visible to you. You and your team can now start to work on, okay, what's the biggest hitter? What is the most pain point? And then solve those problems before A, it becomes an outage. B, you have to create an SR. C, management or other organizations within your company said, oh, by the way, something is out. We would rather have you have that visibility before anything else, right? So normally without a demo, I would go through these, but I'm actually going to skip this because the demo I think is more valuable. And the reasons why I want to show this last one, bear with me, is in order to get VCF Diagnostic to work, you do need to have a working, vCenter environment. You do need to have a working ops environment and an ops for logs. As soon as you tie those three pieces in, majority of the VCF Diagnostic bubbles up. With that being said, if you tie in more additional pieces like NSX, like vSAN, guess what? You get more data coming out of that. But at least the bare minimum, you need vCenter, ops, and ops for logs. Okay, so with that, let me do this. Let me switch over to the demo environment. Okay, so for those who don't have ops, do consider as you're transitioning your license over and you have access to ops, look into it. If you find that you're always working and always fixing and always looking after your VCR environment, deploy ops. And then last but not least, those who are running ops, this is going to look very familiarized to you. With that being said, do consider upgrading to the latest and greatest, which at the moment is 8.18, aka VCF 5.2. Okay, so when you come here, you get to see all of the menu that you would normally see. Now, it has changed slightly, but for the most part, it's all there. And what I want to show you is if you go to home, you notice right in the middle, here's diagnostic. So I'll be talking about findings and I'll talk about search soon after that, right? You can also go here as well. Now, I find that this diagnostic tab is actually more valuable. Reason being is because we will be focusing on this and certs, but there's also a lot of pieces in here as well, right? So case in point, earlier on, I said diagnostic has always been available within operations. It has, and it is. So what I mean by that is if you take a look at the middle section here, so you got the vCenter, ESX, and workload provisioning, right? So if you were to go into any one of these, you will notice that you're automatically moved into the operation, into the dashboard. What I'm getting at is in the past, you would literally do that. You'd go here, go to the dashboard, start looking around on all of your configuration, all of everything, and you get to see all that. With that being said, that may be time consuming because that's a lot of stuff you need to go through. So what the team has done was they bubble up all these diagnostic findings into this dashboard so you can see it right off the bat without trying to hunt for it. Okay. And then the bottom pieces earlier on, I've mentioned, ops and ops for log has had a pretty good tight integration, right? So if you were to go to blog analysis, you'll see that right off the bat, right? So this is logs. You click here and you can actually go into logs itself. But in essence, right now within ops, you're already seeing a lot of the log features already. Well, with diagnostic, that takes it to the next level. So what happens is when I said earlier on, you tie in the vCenter, you tie in ops, and you tie in ops with logs, some of these features will start showing up as well. So what it's doing is ops is looking into logs and saying, okay, here's what we're seeing with vMotion. Here's what we're seeing with snapshots. Let's bubble that up within diagnostic. Also, because of that tighter integration, some of the findings and recommendations shows up in finding as well. Okay. And then last but not least, I said earlier on, if you tie in a vSAN into your environment, guess what? You see it in here as well, right? So once again, this hunts you back to dashboard, but in reality is the whole goal of diagnostic is to carry all the old or all the existing features and then showcasing it together with some of the new features. Okay, so hopefully you get to quite a pretty good understanding of what diagnostic is. So let's go deeper, shall we? So you've heard us mentioning about, Skyline Health Diagnostic, Skyline, and Health Analyzer. At the end of the day, what that does is it says, hey, you're running this particular environment, this particular ESX, this particular vCenter, this particular NSX, you name it, and here are all the problems that we see from it. Because you're running on ops, oh, here's all the existing data that we see on that as well. And then, of course, the log pieces is, oh, we're noticing, there's a trend there. There's a growth in logs pertaining to this particular problem. So right off the bat, and here's the great value. Earlier on, you've heard me mentioning, hey, if you're going to deploy health diagnostic, you have to deploy an OVA, you have to connect to that vCenter. If you deploy ops, you talk to the same vCenter. You deploy advisor, you connect it. What I'm getting at is you have so many environments that you have to configure to point to the same vCenter. And I'm saying one vCenter. What happened if it's a dozen vCenter? What happened if it's hundreds of vCenters, right? So within ops, if you tie it to those vCenters and then you tie the three components together that I mentioned on, this comes online. What that means is you no longer have to worry about, reconfiguring, deploying net new, making, it's already built for you. It's already there. The hope, of course, is it reduced the amount of pain points for administration. Likewise, all this is all internal, right? So we've had customers in the past saying, oh, we love Skyline, but we can't have our data go out. Rest assured, it's not going out. You deployed ops, you upgrade it to 8.18. Diagnostic is part of it. It never goes out and it tells you what you have already. So that's a win-win. So for those who haven't deployed Skyline for that reason, ops will save you there, right? So what you can see right off the bat is you've got X amount of findings right off the bat based on what you've tied in. And then it cuts it down to critical, intermediate, and warning. And the reasons why we do that is we understand that if we were to tell you you've got 108 findings, fix them, you're gonna be so overwhelmed because that's a large number of fixes, right? So what you can say was, well, you know what? My team is worried about just the critical. Let's solve these 12 first because these are what VMware deem as important. You got to fix it before you have an outage, before everything else. Then when that's done, then you worry about the intermediate, then you worry about the warnings, right? So you can also say, well, you know what? Okay, it's great that I see the critical, but I actually want to see what they are. Like, for example, if I were to just be or just interested in security, well, that's the great thing about this is that you can see that we can filter for all of the environments, right? You can also filter for the components. And then last but not least, earlier on, I said, hey, let's just filter for the security aspect, right? And so you can start narrowing stuff down. Instead of worrying about 12, you can now worry about 2, right? But what I was getting at is we start to carve this up into certain components, certain types. So that way, let's say, for example, you've got a team, you've got, a InfoSec team that worries about the security piece. You can work with them on this. If you have the other teams worry about, the upgrades, worry about performance. You can start, cutting these up so that way you can talk to other groups and solve the problem instead of saying, oh, by the way, I've got X amount of problems, I need to fix it. And, so. And then last but not least, as you can see, because I tied in vSphere, vCN, and NSX, it shows up. But if you tie in more components, more options or more components will show up in here as well. So that way you can help identify, which sections you worry about. Okay, so that is it in a whole, but that's not it, right? I mean, the whole goal is okay, all of this is here. Let's bubble up to something that's tangible, something that you can fix. So let's say, for example, let's look for, I don't know, let's grab the first one, shall we? All right, let's take a look at this one, right? Now, if you've used Skyline Advisor before, right, this will look very familiar, but if you're not, the whole goal is that we want to itemize the problem, show you the KB that's tied to it, and say, oh, by the way, here's what it's about. Here are the problem. Here's the KB, right? It's critical. You have it in your environment. We found it in such a date. And since then, we've been scanning every 4 hours, every 15 minutes, you name it. We've been scanning and we noticed that you still have that problem. Here's what's going on, right? Here are the amount of affected objects. Now, if you have used Skyline, this is perfect. You love it for this feature. If you've never used it, what you probably have done in the past is you've probably gone to, VMware Advisors, take a look at the VMSAs, take a look at CVEs, and then start hunting down in your environment which one has it, which one is the problem. Did you catch it? Did anyone else catch the ones you missed and start working that problem? Guess what? You just solved that, at least that portion, which is exactly, you've got within this scenario, you've got 19 problems. Not only do you know there's 19 of them, ops will call it out for you on which ones they are, right? If you and your team say, come in and fix these 2 boxes within 4-hour time frame, if not earlier, it will disappear from view. And instead of 19, it will be 17. With that being said, if you have other environments that other teams are upgrading to match this version, it may appear in here as well. But the great thing, of course, is you and your team can identify those off the bat, right? And then solve it a lot better than, say, InfoSec coming to you saying, oh, by the way, we've noticed that, we were looking at the advisory and then we noticed that you've got a few boxes. What are you going to do about it? Instead of you saying, I don't know, let me look into it. You can say, well, on our list, we're working on it. We hit the other ones. We'll hit those as well. It just makes you look more up to date and more valuable, right? And then last but not least, the recommendation pieces, right? So like for this particular problem, you notice it says, if you're running this version, this build, you'll fix that problem. All right. I've seen scenarios where I've got customers who says, well, we're going to upgrade to 7.0 update 1 because it's newer than what we have. Had they done that, they would have still had this problem and then had to do yet another upgrade. So what I'm getting at here is, what the ops diagnostic is providing you is insights on, you should probably upgrade to this higher version to reduce the amount of additional work that you have to do. Likewise, it's also tying into, say, the vSAN, the NSX pieces as well. So when it does recommendations, it says, upgrade to this version because not only is it going to fix this, but it potentially will fix the other ones as well, right? For this scenario, you'll notice that it'll show a KB article. If it was a VMSA, it will point to like, for example, if we were to take a look at this one, for example, right? It not only tells you, hey, here are the VMSA that has the overall, environment where it may be talking about vCenter, but it could be talking about ops, NSX, you name it. It'll keep talking a lot of things. Likewise, here are some of the KB articles tied to that. And some of these KB articles could be, here's the fix, here's the workaround, here are some things that you should look out for. And then last but not least, it says, oh, by the way, if you're running 6.5, you really need to get to here. If you're running 6.7, get to here. If you're running 7, and please, if you're running these 2, please upgrade to 7 or higher. Okay. So hopefully just that brief view, you get to understand what Ops Diagnostic is providing to you, and all the value, right off the bat. Hey, folks, were there any questions that we should bubble up?
I think your peers are doing a great job, Sonny, of getting the questions answered in Q&A.
Awesome, awesome. I know Sachin and Sejong are awesome. They are so good. Okay, so let's take a step back and let's talk about let's talk about certs, shall we? So let me do this. Give me 1 second. Let me go back to the slide. I just want to show. Kill that off. All right, so certs, right? Let's be honest. Cert is something that we just have to have. And for those who don't worry about it, congrats. But those who do, as we all know, right? When you deploy anything, and let's just make it very simple. If you're deploying ESX and vCenter, for example, right? ESX talks to your vCenter. When you deploy it, by default, it has self-signed cert, which means that it was generated when you deploy it. That's fantastic. You can technically point your ESX to your vCenter, call it a day. But most cases, right, your corporate mandates is you have to provide CA certs, right? And what CA certs does is or what you have to do is you have to create that cert from a web portal, or you have a team that will create that for you based on your name, based on your IP address. And then you insert it into the ESX and you insert it into the vCenter. Why is that important? Well, when you do that, the ESX will have a unique CA identity, which then talks to the vCenter, which is also a unique CA identity, which means when they talk, they know that ESX is who it is, that vCenter is who it is. So there is no such thing as a man in the middle, right? So one of the security concerns is a adversary can come into your environment somehow, act as a man in the middle, interprets everything that is sent to it, which means it can grab username, passwords. It could actually start modifying, some of the requests to its advantage. So CA cert is very important. With that being said, there are a lot of certs. Case in point, ESX has at least 1 or 2 certs. vCenter has 3 certs. NSX has 5 to 7, depends on how many other devices that it's tied to. Ops has a few as well. And that's very consuming when it comes to working it, because it's not like all the certs expire at the same time. Sadly, your ops cert might expire next week. Your vCenter cert might expire next month. So you're always, other than worrying about upgrades, worrying about installs, worrying about repairs, you also have to worry about, okay, on a quarterly basis, let's go in, let's take a look at all our certs, let's make sure what's going on, let's make sure it's up to date, let's make sure that, if it's going to expire, we should probably prep it, and I'll go deeper in a second. But more or less is you got to be on top of certs. And sadly, for the 17 years that I was an IT admin, cert was the last thing on my mind, because there were so many more fires I had to fight. Therefore, when there's an outage, highest chances I have a cert problem, right? So sadly, there is no environment, there is no location that has all the certs that you have in one place. So let me show you certs. So as you can see, if you go back to home, right, earlier on, as you recall, certs is right there. It'll tell you how many certs you have based on how much you've tied in and how many that have expired, which on my part, this looks pretty bad. I know. You can go here as well, and it'll show you the same thing. So if you go in, because I've tied all of these in, right? Even if I tie in the vCenter, it will then look at all the ESXs. It will look and it'll see if there are other connecting pieces. It will show those as well. Right off the bat, you come in, let's say, for example, even if you and your team come in on a monthly basis, you can take a look and go, okay, here's my total. All right, folks, I've got a problem. We should probably, let me notify the team. We should probably fix it, right? And what happens is you can go and you go, okay, all right, here's what's going on. Here are all my appliances, right? You can see there are NSX, there's ops, there's a whole bunch of stuff. And the more you add, the more you have, right? That in itself helps you a little bit, but it doesn't quite explain what's going on. What is important is, okay, which boxes are we talking about? So earlier on, if you recall, I mentioned, like vCenter has a few certs, right? So if we were to keep looking, we'll see the same boxes, see? 05, 05, 05, right? So what I'm getting at is you may be on top of your certs, but you may not have noticed that you've got more certs than what you've been looking at. So the next thing you want to worry about is, okay, what kind of cert is it? Right? Is it a TLS? Is it an STS? Is it a root? Normally, those are the three certs that you'd worry about. But being that, we're also talking about NSX, you can also see platform and principal certs as well, right? So now that in itself is kind of important because I'll give you a heads up. STS and TLS usually are CA certs. Root certs, 50-50. Sometimes they're self-signed, sometimes they're CA. Now, you can ask me, so why do I care? I can just get it within 15 minutes and call it a day. In reality, that might not be the case, right? So like, for example, self-signed certs, you can actually build yourself. So within minutes, you can go in either command line or through the GUI and you can make the changes and voila, self-signed cert is on and you're good to go. CA certs, it depends on your organization. Every organizations that I've been in, and I've been in the financial, I've been in government space. I've been in a few other organizations where I can't build my own CA certs. I have to go to another group who would then build it for me. That could be an hour, that could be a few hours, that could be a day. I've had situations where it was a week, right? So if it's a CA cert and you're active, guess what? You don't have to worry about it. But if it's expired, okay, now you have an outage, right? Because chances are someone trying to get into that environment, it's not going to work. So you fix it right away. Self-signed cert, as I said, you get it fixed. CA certs, you might be out for a few days. You might be out for a few hours. So that's why it's important to take a look on a regular interval to say, okay, they're CA certs. I've got nothing expired. Fantastic. But that's not it, right? Even if it's active, the next thing you need to worry about is, okay, when is it going to expire? Right? Is it going to expire next year? All right, then I wait a few more months. I wait 6 more months, 8 more months, maybe a year, and then I'll worry about it. Or if it's next month, maybe I should worry about it now, right? And as I said earlier on, if it takes you and your organization a little bit of time to create a new CA certs, this gives you the flexibility to say, okay, it's a week out. It's a month out. All right, let's start prepping for the new cert. Let's get it, insert the new cert. Everything stays active, no outage, no problem. Life goes on, right? The last thing we want to see you do is it expired. I'm not going to worry about it. It's active. It's going to expire. I'm not going to worry about it because then what the situation is there will be an outage. People will see it. Managers might see it and others, and it just looks bad on you. So this is the reasons why this is so valuable. And for those who have ops, upgrade to 8.18, you get this right away. And guess what? It's not an extra charge. It's not anything. It's just available. You should definitely leverage it, right? And for those who haven't deployed ops but do have it, I hope me providing the diagnostic and providing the certs is gonna push you to deploy and see all these value. So that's not it. That's just my section. Now I'm gonna hand it over to Kelcey to talk about his. But before that, any questions that we should bubble up? All right. With
Yep,
that,
Sonny, there's a lot going on in the Q&A, so as I'm going through mine, you can just go through those questions, my friend.
I will. Fantastic.
Awesome. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen here. Give me one moment.
Sorry, I couldn't get off mute. Sonny, there's a couple of easy ones. Is it sortable by expiration date? I don't know if you showed that or not.
Is it sortable by expiration date?
I
Did not.
think it is. I just didn't want to say yes without you clicking the button. And I think the other one was they wanted to see what it looked like when it was exported, but I think it's just that basic table, right? There's no
So
extra hidden
let me
fields or anything.
let me do this. Let me share my
Sorry,
screen.
I couldn't get off
Yep,
mute fast
I
enough,
will
guys.
stop sharing, Sonny.
Thank you. All right, so let me share my screen again. So there are some sorts capability, like for example, status you can show. Unfortunately, not for expiration
No.
date.
Okay. That was why I didn't want to say yes to that one.
Okay.
Okay. But yeah, you can do it by status to see which ones are expired.
All right, I was on mute there. Can you guys hear me now?
Sound good?
Awesome. So with that sort of transition, Sonny, thanks for that. And so what I'm going to do right now, right, is I'm going to just talk about, three of the additional enhancements to VCF operations in terms of its improved cloud security and compliance experience that you're all going to be able to have, starting with some of the new updates around license management, right? So let's just jump right into it. So just right out of the gate, right? Um, customers just like you've told us that you essentially just really need two things, right? When it comes to addressing, challenges around license management, right? And the first is just being able to see what you're entitled to in a centralized location, right? Where you can basically just have this single place where you can manage your license keys across your VCF or your VVF deployments, right? And the second thing that you told us is that you wanted to be able to have a single place where you can just see how you're leveraging the software in terms of your ROI, right? So you wanted to have a single place where you can see consumption, both at a point in time as well as historical as well, right? And so with that being said, right, the latest release, it really addresses these two challenges, right? But again, by just providing this centralized plane for license management as well as consumption visibility, where you can add new VCF or VVF or even vSAN per tib license keys to your registered vCenter systems, right? And what's really, really cool about this is that you can also view, like I said, that consumption data. You can see usage trends for all the licenses that are registered to your vCenter systems. And then obviously, there's also legacy license support, right? For older area operations license types. And I'm going to be showing all this here in a moment here. Um, so as I sort of deep dive into to each one of these things, right? Just talking about the benefits of this whole idea around centralized license management is that it gives you a lot of flexibility, right? You can add licenses at installation, or you can even add them later. But once those license keys are added, you can see the license expiration, right? Which is really, really great. And then the second benefit around centralized license management is just the ability to get, like I said, that overview of your license usage, right? So you can use the overview pane here to sort of get like an aggregated view of the data, if you will, for your licenses per product. And it can be seen in a list format or even this graphical view as you're seeing right here. And I'm going to be showing what that looks like in terms of the actual user experience here in a moment. Um, and then moving ahead, right, in terms of what you're seeing here, you can even use the license key section to view that individual license data. So as you saw in the previous slide, you can see the licenses per product. And as you click on the product, you'll be able to sort of get a breakdown of the specific licenses for those individual products. And you can see all of those here, and even the vCenter systems that they're all associated with. And like I said here, you can add the licenses, you can even remove them from here as well. And then once they've been added to the inventory, like I said here, the step process is basically three steps. It's pretty straightforward as you sort of walk through, and I'll be showing this in a demo as well. But the key thing that I wanted to point out here is that in order to get that consumption data to be able to see when license keys are going to expire and the usage and the capacity and all that kind of good stuff, you're going to need to be able to do this here. You're going to have to associate those licenses to your vCenter. So it's optional, but if you really want to get the most in terms of the insight and the data, this right here is a very, very critical component here, and I'll be talking about that, showing that as well. And then the goodness doesn't stop there, right? One of the things about the license keys is that you can drill down into each one of the license keys in more detail with the license key detail pane here. So if I were to click on a license key, booyah, you'll be able to see all the license details in terms of the product name, the capacity, the usage, when it expires, as well as those assign assets in terms of being able to associate them with the vCenter system there. And with that, Oh, hey, Sonny, one of the things that's really, really great about this is, right, with all this data, right, what good is all this data if you can't analyze it, right? And so one of the great things about this latest release is that it takes all that goodness, right, all that data, and it presents it in the form of this license usage analytics tab, right, where you can see the trends of the product and you can even see the individual license keys for each one of these licenses that are related to the product as well. And so you can view the trend, for a period of time ranging anywhere from 1 to 90 days. And you can also view the aggregated usage as well, like I said, in terms of some of the overage, the capacity, and the like here. And like I said, in terms of legacy support, licenses can be added, right, where you can just select the solution or product, and then you can enter, and then you can validate that license key. Obviously, you can do things like delete or remove license keys, and then you can also refresh existing license keys well. And then in addition to that, license groups can also be created for legacy systems, where you can create a group of objects and then you can associate them with a particular level of license keys in order to better control those licensing costs. And with that, let's just go ahead and just segue into a demo here. So just give me one moment to get set up, like so. Let me get this moved over. Booyah. One moment. Sonny, can you see my screen there? All right.
Yep.
All right. So like Sonny mentioned, in terms of just the simplified user experience, right? Everything that you pretty much need here is pretty much accessible in your navigation pane, right? Everything that you need in terms of being able to go to your diagnostics, all your operational functionality, if you're interested in cost and capacity, it's all here and it's easily accessible through this pane here on the left. And so since I'm talking about license management, obviously I'm going to go to the very appropriately named subscriptions here. So let's just go ahead and click on that. We're going to go on the license management. And then, like I said here, in terms of just the license usage overview pane, like I said here, this is where you get to see that all that aggregated data, for each of the product types and all the different license keys, and they're displayed here. And so, and like I said here, here's a table form, but you can also see this in a graphic view as well. And as you click on each one of these, you're going to be able to see things, like I said, in this particular case, I'm looking at the Tanzu piece. I get to see the overage, I get to see the unused capacity, and I can even see usage here. So as I click through each one of these, you get to see all that great information. And what's really, really cool about this is that if you've got license keys and if you're underutilizing them, this will give you that insight to be able to sort of course correct, if you will. And if you're overusing it, then this will give you the insight that you may need to purchase additional licenses as well. And so as I go through this, you'll be able to see how all this is breaking down on a product level here, like so. And then one of the great things about this is that you can also look at these different products, and then you can say, for example, here, see all the individual license keys here. And so in this particular case, if I'm looking at, say, for example, my NSX here, I can see all the different, like I said, the assets that are associated with it. I can see the product name, I can see the capacity, I can see in terms of my usage, I can see the expiration, as well as all those associated assets here. And as I close this out, you can do additional things such as filter too. So if you've got a lot of different license keys, you can use a keyword filter, and then you'll be able to filter by things like the license key or the product name, or even the associated vCenters, as well as the expiration status. Just moving ahead here, in terms of just the ability to add the licenses, like I talked about earlier, it's a pretty straightforward three-step process where you just simply go through, you add your license keys. If you want to get all that usage analytics, you definitely want to be able to add those licenses and associate them to your vCenter as well. So that's how that is done. Moving a step further here, like I said, all that goodness, right? All the usage analytics. Based off of all of my available licenses and different products, I can go through here and I can say, for example, if I want more insight into my vSAN enterprise here, I can click on that and I can just run a report. And again, anywhere from 1 to 90 days. If I submit this, you can actually see how the product itself is trending in terms of just some of the license usage here. And as I click on it and say, for example, here, maybe the system may have went down, or if no one's particularly using that particular license that day, if I were to click on it, I'm going to get all of that data here in terms of what happened here on this date. I can see the usage, I can see the capacity. And what's really, really important to point out here is that I'm looking at it here on a product level, and right underneath it here, the different license keys that are associated with that product. So as I'm clicking on vSAN, the product, I can see what's happening on a product level, but then right underneath it, I can see the 2 license keys that are associated with that product, and I can see how they're being used as well. And so with that, just moving a step forward here, going back to, like I said, that license key level. Like I said here, vSAN, the product has 2 different license keys here, but I can also look at it on a license key level as well in terms of where this is dipping. And so as you noticed here on the 23rd, it's dipping on a license key level, but it's also dipping here on a product level as well. And so there's some consistency there with that being said. And then obviously, we get a lot of questions around reporting upward, right? The visibility in terms of creating reports. And happy to say that this license information, all this data, all this goodness, if you will, can definitely be exported out. Comes out as a CSV file that you can format and make look pretty. All right. And so with that, let's just talk about some of the legacy licenses and that experience that you can expect there. And so as I go back out here and I click on my license, I can actually just go through and click on legacy licenses, and then I can just click on the ad. And here, again, you can select your product, you can enter your license key, and you can validate it, and you're good to go. And with that being said, right, you can track different things. Like I said, the different license types you can see, or even use license related functionality, right? So like I said, such as the license groups and all that different types of things that you can better control your costing. And all right, so let's just go ahead and move forward here and talk about the next topic, which is, if I'm not mistaken, config drifts, right? And so, VCF operations, in terms of its configuration drift functionality for vCenter, one of the things that I want to point out here is that, again, in terms of just the overarching theme, in terms of just this feature being able to just help you, strengthen your cloud security and compliance posture, if you will. And the reason why this is important, right? Obviously, in terms of just some of the context, if you will, obviously, you guys know better than most, when it comes to config management, right? Admins, just really there's a lot of challenges out there in terms of just enforcing, whether it's the global or the regional standards. You're struggling with managing all these different types of configurations across your hosts, your clusters, your VCs, your SDDCs, right? And better than most. Like I said, the process is very manual. It's tedious. It's prone to error. It's hard to track. And quite frankly, it often requires that you go through multiple different products and different user interfaces, right? And obviously when you're doing stuff like that, you got different interfaces, you got different products, this is driving up your operational costs, it's increasing complexity, and it's doing that all at the expense of just, again, just maintaining that strong compliance and security posture, right? And so with this particular release, this vCenter configuration drift functionality, if you will, it really addresses this issue. And so you can use config drifts to monitor and view configuration settings that have drifted from your assigned templates without needing to track every change manually, right? And what's really, really great about this is that configuration drifts, if you will, they actually sort of show the changes in the product configuration over time. And it actually allows you to compare those changes to any assigned template values that you've set up, right? And so with that being said, the net is that it actually just helps prevent, those misconfigurations from going unnoticed. Where it reduces the risk of security breaches. And I'm going to be going more in detail about that when I go into my audit events. And also just quite frankly, this keeps your environment running smoothly, right? And so I'm going to be talking about configuration drifts in these templates, but one of the key things is that it's very important to note is that with these templates, right, you're able to define and you can review the different configuration settings for your vCenter instances. We get a lot of questions about JSON and the different templates, and all that is supported here, right? And so you can leverage all of this and all these different sort of vCenter instances to monitor things such as your network configuration, where you're at in terms of storage and security, as well as even advanced settings. I'm going to be showing that. But in terms of just the key takeaway, we talked about the manual process and the tedium and the prone to error aspect of it all being manual is that with configuration drifts and the templates, right, you got a couple things. You got consistency, right? Because you got these templates that's going to allow you to ensure, that specific groups or your vCenter instances, that they're all configured and that they're consistent. Again, since we're on the theme of compliance, right, configuration drifts, they're going to ensure that your vCenter instances are configured and that they're in compliance with your own organizational standards and policies and regulations. And then last but not least, this whole idea around scalability. And I'm going to be showing this in a demo, but as your infrastructure, scales up, you can manage configuration drifts, and that really is a critical component in terms of just, again, maintaining consistency across your global sort of on-premise environment there. And then while this is not a exhaustive list, so here are some of the key things that are actually being monitored by configuration drifts at a high level. So you can monitor things such as obviously your SMTPs, your syslogs, your networks, different access settings, your date and time configurations for your NTP, user count settings, your policies, lockout, password, all this stuff here. And one of the things that I wanted to point out here in this graphic is that you sort of see what the template value is here on the right-hand side, and then visually you can see if anything is actually drifted from that when you run a configuration drift. And so in this particular scenario, you can see that someone's changed the password policy, that the max life and the length were at one value and someone's gone in and they've modified that. So you're able to sort of see that delta. And I'm going to be showing this in the demo. Now, like Sonny mentioned on diagnostics, right? There's some prerequisites that need to be satisfied in order to, create and view configuration drifts, right? So one of the key things, and probably the most important piece here, is that, you've got to have an administrator role set up, and that you've got to verify that that administrator, the person who is using configuration drift, that they've got the privileges, whether it's a managed privilege that's needed for creating the templates and assigning them to a policy, or a view privilege for anyone who just simply just needs to be able to see what the drifts are. And here's another big component here too, is that configuration drifts for vCenter is applicable for vCenter 8.03 and higher. So you want to make sure that you've got that. And so if you're looking to get this configured and if you're not being able to see that option to configure it, this is most likely the reason here. So you want to make sure that you've got that. And then last but not least, you want to make sure that you've got your that you've registered your vCenter with your cloud proxy. And so with that, let's just go into the demo for this. So give me one moment to get set up. Like so. Gonna move this over. Boom. And all right. And so let's just go ahead and jump right into it, right? And so again, this user experience, everything that you need to access is again very accessible through this very intuitive sort of piece here. And since I'm going through config drifts, this is an operational functionality. So if I were to click on my operations, you can see all the different types of things, even the things like audit events that I'm going to be showing here in a moment here. So if I were to click on configuration drifts, one of the things that you're going to see right out of the gate, I'm going to walk you through this process of creating configuration drifts and applying them to policies within vSphere. And so let's just go ahead and walk through it. It's a very, very intuitive piece here. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a configuration drift template. I'm going to go ahead and give it a name. Let's just say appliance here. Let's just go ahead and click next. And like I said here, I'm going to associate it with my vCenter. And this one, again, 8.03 and higher. So let's go ahead and associate that. As I'm walking through this wizard here, it's guiding me through this process. And then there's two different types of configuration drifts that you can monitor. You can monitor things on an appliance component or a category, if you will, as well as authentication. And so in this particular scenario, let's just walk through all the different types of config that you can monitor in terms of a drifting point of view from an appliance point of view. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this. And as you can see here, like I said, you can monitor things like your access settings. You can see things like your CIP. You can, again, my favorite in terms of some of the date time configurations, the NTP, your time sinks, your different time zones. You can see if things have drifted in terms of your DNS server configuration, if there's any deviation from your firewall rules, your proxy configurations, all of those can be found here if you want to manage those. In terms of some of the SMTP configurations that you may want to monitor from a drift perspective, you can see things like your mail servers and the like. Software update policies, as well as user account settings here. And so with that, one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to say, hey, you know what? I want to manage and monitor them all, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Walk through my wizard. I'm going to associate this to my vSphere policy because, again, this is a very, very critical component here in terms of being able to get this functionality to work. So let's just go ahead and do that. And as I call your attention to the template here, you can see here, these are the different types of things that I just sort of showed at a high level, but you get to see some of the more granular components of the appliance management in terms of some of the configuration drifts, in terms of SHNA, if it's enabled or not, and all that kind of good stuff. So all that's here on this particular side. So again, as I walk through my template here, my wizard, I get a summary in terms of the template that I've created. I've got it associated to my vCenter. It's going to be extracted from this particular vCenter that I've appropriately named 8.03, and I've assigned it to a policy here. So now I'm just going to go ahead and click create. Now, we've got that component here. And one of the things that I mentioned earlier in terms of one of the great aspects of this is this whole notion around scalability. So, as your environment sort of goes up and it gets bigger and you've added more components to your environment, you can actually go ahead and be proactive in the sense that you can create templates and have them ready to go without even having to assign it to a policy. So let's just go ahead and sort of walk through that. And as you can imagine here, very similar process. I create a template, I give it a name. I'm going to go ahead and click next. I'm going to associate it with my vCenter here and just sort of walk through it. But this time I'm going to just pick some of my authentication sort of pieces here. So let's just go ahead and sort of walk through some of the pieces here that you can monitor from an authentication point of view. And so you can look at things like your lockout policy. You can look at your password policy in terms of some of the things that you can monitor here. Your token policies. And so with that, let's just go ahead and select it all, walk through the wizard. In this particular case, I am not going to assign it I'm just going to go ahead and click on next. But again, here you can see all the different types of things in terms of the field and all the different types of data that's being monitored here. So I'm just going to go ahead and click next. And as you can see here in this particular scenario, very similar to the first, but one of the things that I want to point out is that there is no policy assigned to it. And this is okay because right now, like I said, I'm planning for the future. I'm planning to scale, but I don't necessarily want to associate it to a policy right now. So I'm just going to go ahead and click create. Now, fast forward a bit, right? Let's say the time has finally come and you want to scale up and you want to apply this config drift template. You can do that as well here. So the thing that you want to do is you want to go to your configurations, and I'm going to show you how you can take that newly assigned config drift template and now associate it with the policy on the back end when you raise scale. And so go into configurations. Again, since I'm assigning it to a policy, I'm going to go to the appropriately named policy definition here, right? I'm going to go ahead and pick my active one, and I'm going to edit the policy and go to my configuration template here. And as you saw earlier, I've already got one that I've already set up, and that was the one for appliance. So now what I'm doing now is I'm going to go back and I'm going to take that authentication template and I'm going to associate it here. So let's just go ahead and click on that, and we're just going to activate it. I'm going to go ahead and click save. So now that all the processes are in place, let's look at how this plays itself out inside of VCF operations. And so I'm going to go back to my config drifts. And one of the things that's really, really cool here, like I said, is that you get this component here where you can see your vCenter by drift status. You can see the by templates as well. And one of the things that I want to point out is that you may notice that it says 4 not supported and 1 is supported. And so what this is basically saying is that in this environment, I've got one vCenter that meets that prerequisite, right? Like I said, that 8.03 or higher. So that's the one that's available, but I've got some vCenters that are lower than that. And so that's what this means by the unsupported piece here. Looking at it from a template level, you can also see very similarly, some of those reports here. And so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to detect the drift. I'm going to take my vCenter. And as you can imagine here, if I'm going to detect the drift for something that I just created, obviously there's no drifts in place yet. Same thing for the one that I just recently created for authentication. But let's say, for example, someone's gone in and they've made a change. You know what? Let's just go ahead and do that. I'm going to go now into my vSphere client. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to edit the password policy. As you notice, that was one of the parameters that config drifts allows you to monitor here. So I'm just going to go through and I'm going to change the, let's see here, the lifetime here. Let's just take it from, what is it, 90 to 60. Let's change the password length here. And let's just go back now. And so what's really, really great about this is that this is actually in real time, right? And so now if I were to go back and do a detect of my drift here, it's spinning, it's thinking, booyah, you get to see where it was, where it currently is, and you'll be able to see that delta. And so with this, this is a great way to sort of allow you to monitor your configuration drifts. You can plan for future scaling by creating templates and then associate them with policy later. But again, all of this is being done in a single user interface. You don't have to learn additional tools, go across multiple different systems. It's all centralized, just like license management. It's all here for you to take advantage of.
So Kelsey,
Yep.
I have to admit, when I saw you do this, I was blown away. And here's the reason. In the past, I would try to use Ansible
Yeah.
and Salt to try to talk to the vCenter, to try to talk to ESX, to try to talk to all the VMware components to see if NTP is set right, to see if log is set right. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And I have to learn all of that. Here,
Right.
it's like menu, click, click, click. You can see it. That's powerful.
Booyah.
Exactly.
Most definitely. So and thanks for reiterating that and just emphasizing the importance of that, is that it's all centralized. It's in one interface. You don't have to learn new tools. It's all here and it's all easily accessible as part of that unified experience. As part of this new cloud console experience that VCF operations offers. And so, Sonny, what's really, really funny about that demo is that, whenever I do, the configuration drift demo, right? You know, I often get asked, is there a way to determine who triggered the configuration drift, right? And so this is actually sort of a great segue into like this last example in terms of how VCF operations. This again, it improves that security and that compliance posture with audit events, right? And so, what are audit events in the context of VCF operations, right? And essentially, what this means at a high level is that, all vCenter audit events, such as searches, logins, logouts, you know, capability checks and configuration modifications, they're all now displayed across your vSphere, your vSAN, your NSS resources. And again, it's all in a single location. I can't stress this enough. It's in a single location that's going to really help ensure that you're aware of any changes to your VCF infrastructure, right? And when you're doing your audit events, you're going through your discovery, and ultimately what this helps is that it's actually going to reduce that TTR, right? That total time to resolution if action is required to remediate a security or a compliance issue. And so with that, right, obviously, the benefits I feel at least, they're pretty obvious, right? You get